So that's it. So let's get started today's lecture, and then probably, Sachin will have time up to 5 o'clock, yeah?
Sir, yeah. Yes, yes.
Okay, if I feel it actually that we should close it early, I can do that also, because today has been a very horrible day. We had so much of loss of time and so much of mental pressure in rearranging, redoing, reconnecting, and all.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so let's forget about that. We will come back to our job.
Yeah. Sir, it is always a privilege to hear you, sir.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I feel sorry that we couldn't see each other face to face. And it is, I feel I miss that opportunity of seeing the body language of each of the uh,
Participants.
participants, and at the same time you're seeing the body language of the presenter. So that part is certainly absent in this sort of presentation. It makes it, I would say it's about 20% to 30% efficient.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So we'll get started. Now we see that we have talked about the solution of corrective, taking the approach based on the Westergaard stress function approach, and it is certainly something based on the typical procedure that are followed in stress analysis. But then in some physical problems, we are also in a position to get the solution to problems by considering what is known as eigenfunction approach. Eigenfunction approach, just I would like to give you some linkage, is that when you try to solve the vibration problems, you get some equations wherein it is transcendental equation. It will have infinite of number of solutions possible, and each of the solutions is going to have will satisfy the involved equation or governing equation. But then these are number of solutions. Each of them means something, some relevance, some meaning is there, and therefore this eigenfunction approach is there in the case of vibration problems. In the case of vibration problem, you have come across, you get equation like sine x is equal to 0, and therefore you could have solutions for this equation, infinite number of solutions. Each of them indicates something, and therefore each solutions are called actually eigen. Each solution is eigen solution, but then each of them indicates some physical picture, and that is eigenfunction. So eigenfunction, eigen solution based approach, these are there in vibration, and indeed in some physical problems, also other problems, this eigenfunction approach is there. And fortunately, in the case of stress analysis, particularly in case of crack problems, there are also possibility of obtaining solutions based on this eigenfunction approach, and that's what we'll talk about. In fact, we have talked about mode 1, and I also indicated that you can take the similar approach for finding out solution for mode 2 also. And I have given you Westergaard stress function for mode 2, that phi for mode 2, it is going to be minus I tau z by square root z square minus a square. And the expression for stresses are slightly different. They are also available. But this, we like to show you that the solution for crack problems, corrective stress problems also can be obtained through eigenfunction approach, and that's what is my job. And in fact, this eigenfunction approach, it's a three-dimensional problem. Mode 3 is a three-dimensional problem, it's not two-dimensional. So therefore, herein actually you cannot have the approach based on stress function. It is based on, it was first obtained by considering the approach based on this eigenfunction approach. That's what we would like to talk about. And I can tell you that this is actually slightly more starting from fundamentals, nothing more actually complex. It is very simple and more physical, and therefore you might find it a little more interesting. Now, a problem of mode 3 is shown there on the sketch, which is on the screen. And you see, in this case, if you try to see the deformation, origin is shown there. It's a plate-like thing which has some thickness in the z direction, and the xy plane is right at the center of the plate, and origin is again at the crack tip. And if we now consider the loading, loading at infinity that are there, that uniform stress tau, tau is there, and that tau is shown indicated by the arrow there. What are the ways they are there at the boundary? And in this problem, you see, if somebody focuses on the crack tip, xy plane, and z is perpendicular to xy, then in that case, you see that the deformation is going to be symmetric. It is actually going to be symmetric about xy plane, and you are going to have deformation. The points of the plate, they are just actually around the crack tip. It's just going to move in the z direction. It does not have any movement in the x and y direction. So it is just actually getting twisted. So it is just going parallel to the z axis, or it is moving parallel to xz plane, and that's what it is. And therefore the displacements that are there is no displacement in the a point in general does not any displacement in the x and y direction. So u and v are 0, and w is the displacement of a point in the z direction. That's only there, and its value is actually dependent on the coordinate location x and y. That's it. So it's a problem wherein the problem is defined in terms of displacements, symmetric displacement. W is a function of x and y, and u and v both 0, and there is no strain in the z direction. What is this? It is showing something. Improve your vision. No, I think these are useless. Whatever is appearing on the screen is useless. Yeah, okay. So therefore, you see that if this is the case, so therefore we have the current problem wherein it is simply the problem requires determination of a single function z displacement w as function of x and y. That's it. And therefore, you see, by taking the Hooke's law, stresses, displacements are there. Therefore, it automatically means that epsilon x is 0, epsilon y is 0, gamma xy is 0. So you know delta u delta x is 0, delta v delta y is 0, and gamma xy means delta u delta y plus delta v delta x. They are also 0. And since the w is a function of x and y, it's not dependent on z, epsilon z is also 0. So therefore, if you out of 6 strains, your 4 strains are 0. So that is one great simplification, and thereby using the Hooke's law, you find that sigma x is 0, sigma y is 0, tau xy is 0, sigma z is 0. So only the non-zero stresses are tau zx and tau xy, and it is independent of this. So tau zx and tau zy are function of x and y, and they are not dependent on z. So that's the great simplification in this case, and therefore we find that tau zx and tau xz are equal to mu times derivative of w as a derivative with respect to x. Tau yz is actually non-zero, and it's related to derivative y of w. So that's it. These are the stresses. Now the question is, you have 2 stresses and just one function. So how do we get that equation involving w? So obviously, if you take the third equilibrium equations in 3 dimensions, the third equilibrium equation is written there: tau zx derivative with respect to x, tau zy derivative with respect to y, and the derivative of sigma z with respect to z is 0. So finally, what it means that the w function, w as a function of x and y, it is going to satisfy Laplace equation. Mu is a constant, and therefore you see that within the bracket that is the Laplace equation, and therefore w is a harmonic function. Harmonic function means it is a solution of Laplace equation. So from the complex variable formulation, one can immediately conclude that we can represent W as a function of one harmonic function. So we actually introduce one harmonic function, and it is analytic function fz. Because analytic functions are actually they are harmonic functions. So therefore, I can write W as a function. It is real function, and therefore we just actually take the real and it's actually conjugate. So fz and its conjugate fz over bar, and that will give one real function. So fz is an analytic function, and indeed I can write then delta w delta x as this derivative is actually their derivative of the function with respect to z, x derivative is with respect to x, and similarly y derivative is going to be I will be there, I f dash z minus I f dash z bar. So that's how we get, and therefore delta w delta x square is going to give you that derivative expression, double derivative, and then y derivative is going to have 2 times I, that will become actually minus I. So that gives you delta w delta y square. And now we can write from these expressions, since the stresses are given by delta w delta x and delta w delta y, if I write this expression tau xz minus I tau z, and if when I put the value of derivative of w with respect to x and y, it gives me that two stresses tau xz, tau yz, which are non-zero, they are given by this expression. It is 2 times first derivative of f dash z, that one analytic function. And now I can assume very easily that anything with z to the power exponent, that is analytic function. So let us assume fz as c z to the power lambda plus 1, where c is a complex constant. It is a constant, and let us say that c is equal to a plus ib, where both a and b are real, and lambda is a real constant, it's not imaginary, and ab are real constant. Indeed, it is a and both a and b are real. So then in that case, you see that with this definition of the function fz, I can now write what is delta w is this, because that is again in terms of fz, and that gives us this one, and that this w, you see, it is 1 by mu, c is a plus ib, they are real, z to the power lambda plus 1, c bar z bar to the power lambda plus 1. I think this is something, please again try to understand what does it mean, that w is the displacement in the z direction in the whole space, x and y space, and it is actually going to have value, and obviously, see, that's a real problem, and therefore you don't expect displacement nowhere in the body to go to infinity. That this problem is real, and therefore displacements are also going to be all real, and they are not going to be shooting to infinity everywhere, and that is one simple thing to happen. And now see, this w is a displacement of a point in terms of z, and now obviously this expression, it tells something very important to mark, that you see z to the power lambda plus 1. Lambda is a real constant. Now, if you think of it, that lambda is equal to minus 1, you see, minus 1, it will become z to the power 0. That means the displacement will become constant everywhere. Can you appreciate that if lambda exponent is minus 1, then it will be z to the power minus 1 plus 1 0. So w will become constant. So that's lambda 1 is a solution. It is simply rigid body mode, everywhere the same displacement. So that's not what is useful to us. We want w which can give deformation in the body. So therefore it simply means that lambda is certainly not minus 1, but if it is actually more than 1, minus, you see, if it is more than minus 1, then what happens? You see that, we say if it is minus 2, then in that case, W will become Z to the power minus 1, then in that case, for Z equal to 0, displacement will become infinity. Can you see that? If lambda is equal to, let's say, it is minus 2, then in that case, it is W is going to be Z to the power minus 1. And as Z2 tends to 0, that means as we approach crack tip, the displacements become infinity. So that is something stupid. So therefore, it cannot be actually, lambda value can never be below minus 1. And it can be having value more than minus 1. Minus 1, let's say its value is actually minus, let's say, minus half, let's say. If it is minus half, you see, then in that case, then your actually W will become Z to the power, it is minus half, means it is more than Z to the power 0, and therefore as Z tends to 0, it will become again actually 0. So therefore, the possibility of lambda not less than minus 1 is okay, but then it cannot be actually, again, it can be actually more than minus 1, that it can be having value minus half, it can have value minus 0.25, minus 0.35 and all that. So therefore, that's what we see, that it cannot be, it is certainly more than minus 1. So, so at lambda greater than minus 1, you see, it gives rigid body mode, and the stresses are then in that case given by this. And here you see the stresses are this. So now you see tau xz minus I tau yz is 2 times c lambda plus 1 z to the power minus. Now we have come to the state that lambda greater than minus 1 is always possible. Lambda equal to 1 gives rigid body mode, which is same, so it's not true. But now we see you have here lambda tau xz minus I tau yz, these are all constants, r to the power minus lambda. So you see that if you have, let's say this lambda is greater than minus 1, that is okay. And you see that if you are trying to say minus 1, so it can have value like minus 3/4, minus half, and so on. So if I now try to say that lambda is having value actually greater than minus 1, it can have value actually minus half. So if you have great stress, then in that case stress is actually, this first part is A plus IB, they are all constants, r to the power minus half, and then theta function, variation with theta. R to the power minus half, if that is the case, then in that case you see that stress shows something, some important features. If r to the power minus half, then the stresses are going to become infinity at r equal to 0, and it is going to have what is called square root singularity. If you have lambda equal to minus half, then in that case, this both stresses, it will have real and imaginary part, but it will also have some part which is dependent on r to the power minus half. As r tends to 0, that means that the crack tip stresses are infinity. And what is its feature? As you approach the crack tip, stress is becoming infinity, and it is square root singularity because r to the power minus. So therefore, it is possible that lambda can have value certainly more than the minus 1, but it is actually not less than minus 1. That's the only feature that we can get out of this expression. So stress is one relation that gives us a sort of selectivity, that the stress expression should be such that it should, or lambda should be such, it must be greater than minus 1, and there can be a singularity for values more than minus 1. So that's what it is. So in that case, the stresses are going to be given, tau xz is given by that expression, tau yz is given by that expression, where c has been expressed in terms two real constants a and b. They are real constants. Okay, so that's the solution. Now crack faces are stress-free. You see, both the crack faces in the problem that we have, the crack is there, and if you look into carefully that the sketch, you see your theta is actually referred to xz plane. So as you have angle, if you think of a theta angle here from the origin with an angle with the x and y direction, so that theta angle, that theta is actually what one is talking about. And the crack faces is then defined by theta equal to plus pi is the top face, theta equal to minus pi is the bottom face of the crack. So therefore, on the two crack faces, theta equal to plus pi and minus pi, they are stresses tau xz and tau yz, they are zeros. So that's what is one thing. And the equilibrium equation finally comes also in that form, that it is Laplace equation delta W, get to W is 0. So we have got all that. Now, this also is there, stresses and expressions are say given there, and if you segregate tau xz is this, tau yz is this. Both involves A and B. And now, using the physical situation, crack faces are free of tau yz, therefore theta equal to pi and theta equal to minus pi, this is 0. So this represent an eigenvalue problem. So therefore you see both these equations, they are going to have situation for theta equal to pi 0, theta equal to minus pi 0. So if we take these two equations, that theta equal to 0 and theta equal to minus pi, let us say we try to write that this tau xz or tau y at 0, then it gives me these two equations. So the boundary conditions of the problem, it tells you b cos lambda pi plus a sin lambda pi equal to 0, b cos lambda pi minus a sin lambda pi equal to 0. So these two equations, here a and b are two constants, and if you are going to have non-trivial solution, that means both a and b must be non-zero. See, both a and b 0, they are trivial solutions, they will satisfy, that is of no use. We want solutions which will make a and b non-zero, and therefore for non-trivial solutions for a and b, we must have determinant of these two equations equal to 0, and which means that 2 sin lambda pi cos lambda pi equal to 0. That means 2 sin lambda pi is equal to sin plus minus n pi, and therefore the solution for lambda is plus minus n by 2, where n is a real constant, and therefore n can have value 0, 1, 2, and minus infinity to plus infinity, and then corresponding to each of them, your lambda is going to be, it's like minus infinity to minus half, plus half, 0, half, plus 3 by 2. So these are the eigen values of the unknown n, and you can have possibility of solutions for this problem with lambda equal to minus 1, minus half, and already we have abstracted earlier that lambda can never be less than minus 1. So it can take values like minus 1, minus half, 0, plus half, 1, 3 by 2. So each of them is a possible solution, and since lambda greater than minus 1 possible values only, then the acceptable values are minus half, 0, half, 1, 3 by 2. So this common difference is actually half. So this is how there are infinite number of solutions starting from minus half to infinity, plus infinity. For every lambda, there is a mode shape. That means A and B will have some relationship. This is called mode shape. And therefore, that each of them will indicate a relationship between A and B. So let us examine the first value of lambda, which is lambda equal to minus half. So for lambda equal to minus half, we get stresses to be proportional to r to the power lambda, means r to the power minus half. That means actually it is having singularity, stress singularity at z equal to 0. And for this lambda equal to minus half, you have the relationship from the equations, Hamilton's equation, we get a equal to 0 and b is the only non-zero value, and then therefore this finally solutions fj, which can be written as ib lambda to the power half. So that's the solution for this case. Fj is ib, I am sorry, it should be really ib z to the power half. So that's what it is. So therefore this tau xz is then this expression 2 half r to the power minus half b sine theta. So it is b by root pi, root r, I am sorry, b by root r into sine theta by 2. So that gives you that b by root r sine theta by 2 tau yz is minus b by root r cos theta by 2. Therefore, the two solutions for stresses are in terms of b. And how do you get this b? So we can make use of the relationship that is available for crack problems. It has been given by Irwin that as r tends to 0, if we try to take the product tau yz into root 2 pi r, that gives the stress intensity factor, and therefore b root 2 pi is equal to minus k3, and therefore b equal to minus k3 by root 2 pi, and therefore finally your stresses finally is going to be given by hence tau xz is equal to q by root 2 pi r sin theta by 2 tau yz is k3 by root 2 pi r. So this solution, you know, that this is what was obtained by Irwin. In fact, this solution we have also given you in my lecture earlier. So this is it. Therefore, we have been able to get the solutions, and W again it is in terms of lambda and Z. So if I just write the expansion for W, W is going to be given by this tau, this expression inside, and which is nothing but again expanded form is this sin theta by 2 cos theta by 2, and the real part if you just go on collating together, so it gives you that k3 by root 2 pi k3 by mu into root 2 pi r sin theta. So therefore you see that this finally gives you the solution for the mode 3 problem. So mode 3 problem, therein you have actually got the solution for the singularity term, which is involving stress intensity factor, and that solution is here. So W displacement is given by this expression. If you check the my actually lecture in mode 3 solutions are given in this form. So that's done. So this is what is the eigenfunction approach for tractive solution, and you get both stresses and displacement field. So it's quite simple problem. You see, this is what is eigenvalue approach. Now I think I just wanted to tell you another point which is for noting that lambda equal to minus half is the solution. If you take lambda equal to 0, that will give you some solution, and that will give you solutions wherein again some two constants will be involved, which can be written as, you know, a1 r to the power 0, b1 r to the power 0. Similarly, when some function of theta will be there, if we involve f1 theta as function associated with xz stress and g1 theta for yz stress. So this is the solution for the lambda equal to 0. Lambda equal to plus half will give you another solution where there will be two constants again, a2 and b2. So again you will get actually r to the power half f2 theta g2 theta. So therefore you see that your solution for each value of lambda will be different, and if you wanted to get the general solution, you just superpose them. As in the case of harmonic problems also, in harmonic motion where multiple frequencies are there, you try to superpose the solution for each frequency, that gives you the general solutions. Here also the same thing. Eigenfunction approach, you can get each eigenvalue. For each eigenvalue, you will have a solution, and then go on actually superposing the solution, that gives you the general problem, the general solution to the problem. That's what it is. So this will have infinite number of terms, and this R exponent is increasing by half. So this is what is, you know, that infinite series. Generally, you know, the active solution has infinite number of terms, and this gives you the explanation how that infinite number of terms come. It comes from the eigenvalue approach. So we have not given you that written that. In fact, active solutions, if you see both for mode 1, mode 2 and mode 3, that will have infinite number of terms, and the R exponent is going to increase by half for each of the terms, and that gives you the general solution. So that's what it is. And the basis is this eigenfunction approach. So this is what is mode 3 solution. Now, we can also apply this approach to mode 1 and mode 2 problems. So I think you know that this is known as Williams stress function approach. In fact, this mode 3 solution was first actually attempted by Williams, and he could show the solution for mode 3, and then subsequently he applied this to obtain the solutions for mode 1 and mode 2 also. So I would like to show that this Westergaard stress function was applied to mode 1 problem and can be applied to mode 2, but at the same time, we can also apply Williams eigenfunction approach, which is the type that we have considered for mode 3 for mode 1. So I'll just try to actually go for it. This is what. So eigenfunction expansion approach to mode 1. Complex variable formulations we have already given you, and we have also shown you the expression for sigma x plus sigma y minus sigma x plus 2i tau y. So if I invoke two analytic function fz and f in case of actually mode 1, if I just have single function f dash z, then in that case you see that the stresses are given in terms of single analytic functions fz and two analytic functions fz and psi z. So if I use two analytic functions to write the stresses, then sigma x plus sigma y is there, and sigma y minus sigma x plus 2i tau xi is given by this. There are two analytic functions, f dash is z and psi, or fz and psi z. So that's how it is. And then finally, these two expressions can be written in terms of fz and psi z. And finally, sigma y plus tau xi tau xi is given by this expression. And similarly, the displacement expression is given by the two analytic function fz and psi z. And now let's say that these are analytic functions, so I can write that fz is equal to a z to the power lambda plus 1, and psi dash z, first derivative in terms of b z to the power lambda plus 1. So therefore, that we just write the two analytic functions in terms of two exponential functions, a z to the power lambda plus 1 and b z to the power lambda plus 1, wherein a is a complex constant, b also is a complex constant, and lambda is a real quantity. So we can write, let's say a is c plus id, and then in that case you see that we can write your stress sigma y plus sigma x. You see, it is just involving that fz function. So if I write that sigma y plus sigma x is going to be, if I write that fz is equal to a z to the power lambda plus 1, then in that case sigma y plus sigma x is going to be, it can be written in this form: a is c plus id, c and d are real constants, that will have this expression. And finally, if you write your expansion, you will have actually e to the power I lambda theta, so it will be actually a into r to the power lambda cos lambda theta. So it is a cos lambda theta plus I sin lambda theta. Similarly, a bar, we will have the value cos lambda theta minus I sin lambda theta. So all that you can write, and finally it will give you sigma y plus sigma x is equal to 4 times lambda plus 1 r to the power lambda cos lambda theta minus b sin lambda theta. Here actually you have some physical situation which has to be brought in. Here the stress is going to be proportional to the r to the power lambda. So therefore, this lambda is involved as an exponent of the r coordinate, and there is a theta function. So r function, theta r and theta dependency is there. Now one thing, in a mode 1 problem, what do you expect? That if you try to think of a mode 1 crack, please just actually I want answer from all of you, that think of the crack that we are talking about. It's a crack wherein, that you have x-axis, is origin is at the crack tip, and then y-axis pointing upward and y negative is pointing downward, and theta is measured from the x line. So now tell me, what is the nature of the stresses sigma x and sigma y in the first quadrant and the third quadrant? Or rather, actually, let me put it this way: theta equal to 0 to 90 degree and theta equal to 0 to minus 90 degree. In these two quadrants, what do you expect to happen to the stresses sigma x plus sigma y? Let me just give you the sketch and then talk, and you try to answer. I hope I have a sketch here. Yeah, this is it, this type of situation, but it's a mode 1 problem. So you think of it that this quadrant from x to y axis in this region, in this theta equal, if you measure theta with a xz plane to be coinciding with the xz plane, theta equal to 0, and then if it is coinciding with the, let's say, yz plane, that is theta equal to positive 90 degree. Similarly, that if you think of it, y direction minus y, and then the theta you measure in the bottom half, it is going to be 0 to minus 90. So now tell me, what sort of picture that you expect in this stresses sigma x, sigma y in this quadrant and the bottom quadrant? Am I in a position to make it clear? So I am trying to say, let us think of xy coordinates, and if I just write theta equal to 0 coinciding with x-axis, theta equal to 90 for coinciding with positive y-axis, and similarly theta equal to minus 90 coinciding with minus y-axis. So what do you expect to have the relationship between the stresses in the top quadrant and the bottom quadrant? Can you tell me what are they in the case of mode 1 problem? Are they going to be same or different?
Yeah, the picture will be symmetric.
Symmetric. That means actually that both sigma x at a point in the positive quadrant is going to be the same as the value in the negative quadrant.
Yeah,
So y is also going to have the same value. So therefore, you see, sigma x plus sigma y both in the positive and negative quadrant are the same. So therefore, sigma x plus sigma y is symmetric. That's the what you call outcome, that sigma x plus sigma y is a symmetric function of the coordinate, and that's what is is the conclusion that we can make, and therefore we will have to make use of it, and then we'll come to something which is useful to us. So herein you see that sigma x, sigma y plus sigma x, wherein you see that sigma y and sigma x summation is dependent on c d cos theta and sin theta. So c is real constant, d is real constant, and now we come to conclusion that sigma x plus sigma y is going to be actually symmetric about theta equal to 0. So how can that be assured? How can we assure that? You have this relationship from the assumption of the function fz in the form of z to the power lambda theta. We get to this relationship, and what does it mean? That theta sigma y plus sigma x must be symmetric about theta equal to 0. And in this expression, look at this expression and tell me how can we assure that symmetric conditions, symmetric function. In this expression, you see that your first part is related to cos lambda theta. Second part is related to sin lambda theta. Can you remember that cos lambda theta is a symmetric function? It is actually going to have value whether cos theta or cos minus theta, they have same value. So theta positive and theta negative, that first term is going to actually make the value same. It does not change. On the other hand, if you take the second term, which is dependent on sin lambda theta, sin theta positive is actually positive, but theta negative, it is negative. So it is anti-symmetric. Are you getting me? So therefore, you see, if the sum of the two stresses are going to be symmetric about theta equal to 0, then in that case, in this expression, d constant must be 0. That's what it is. So one conclusion that we can make out, that a constant which is dependent on both c and d for symmetric, ensuring symmetric conditions of the stresses about theta equal to 0, d must be 0. So therefore, that constant a is a real constant. There is no imaginary part. If the imaginary part is there, then in that case it will become antisymmetric. So it's an even function of theta, and cosine function is an even function of theta. So therefore, we get to the conclusion that the constant that is invoked as a, it will be a real constant. That's one interesting point, and that will ensure the condition sigma x plus sigma y for theta equal to plus alpha and theta equal to minus alpha same. That's what it is. Top half and bottom half, the stresses are the same. Similarly, let us see another thing. Similarly, if we consider that displacement field is also symmetric. The displacement of a point in the first quadrant and displacement of the corresponding point in the bottom half or third, it is actually third quadrant, it is the same. It has got to be the same. And therefore, again, your expression for this displacement is also going to be involving two constants, and therefore one has to assume that because of the symmetric displacement field, it can be established that b is a real constant. So b is again another constant that we have invoked, b, so that b is actually where? It will be I dash z, b z to the power lambda plus 1. That b can be actually again complex. It can have value like e plus if, so that it cannot have f. It can have simply e, which is going to ensure symmetricity of the displacement field about theta equal to 0. So that's what. Therefore, it has been concluded that this is b is a real constant. So that's done. Now, from this relationship u plus iv, if I substitute the value of fz and chi dash z, both u and v involve a term r to the power lambda plus 1. So this is going to involve r to the power lambda plus 1. This is also going to involve r to the power lambda plus 1. And for again, from this we can immediately conclude, as in the case of mode 3, that for finiteness of displacement at every point within the domain, including r equal to 0, lambda must be greater than minus 1. So therefore, this lambda is also having a constant. Its value cannot be less than minus 1. It is going to be only greater than minus 1. So these two conclusions can be immediately made, and therefore we have been able to establish from the consideration of the physics of the problem that this A is a real constant, it does not have the imaginary part, and B is also a real constant because of the finiteness of or symmetricity of the displacement field around the plane theta equal to 0. And then subsequently, that if with this, if I now go on actually writing the stresses in terms of two constant, both real constant A and B, and then we get these expressions, and then sigma y is going to be this expression, and tau xi is this expression. And now again, for the mode 1, we have understood that displacement, the crack faces theta equal to pi and theta equal to minus pi, they are both 0, both shear stress and normal stress on the crack faces are 0. So if we do that, so that will actually, even just if you just make use of the point that, just a minute. Yeah, if we just actually write that sigma y equal to 0 for theta equal to pi and tau x equal to 0 for theta equal to pi, so we get this relationship. So these two expressions, which are going to be true, both the normal and shear stresses are 0, that gives us these two equations, and obviously these two equations, just a minute. So if we just actually write these two equations, then finally, we can get this. With this, we get that these are actually, if we just neglect this part, and then these two equations are there. And if we just write them again, it gives you the conditions for non-trivial, two constants are there, A and B, and for the conditions that tau xy equal to sigma y equal to 0, theta equal to pi, tau xy equal to 0 for theta equal to pi. So that gives us these two equations, which are actually again eigenvalue form. These two equations, which can be again converted into this form, which is again going to give you sine 2 lambda pi is equal to sine n pi. N can have value minus infinity to plus infinity. Therefore, lambda can have value plus minus n by 2. And therefore, the possible values are minus half, 0, half, and 3 by 2, and so on. So it goes on actually increasing in that order. And finally, we here actually values are minus half, 0, half, then 1, 3 by 2. I'm sorry that values are missing. So finally, you see that if we take the first term, the lowest value of lambda that is possible is minus half. So if we take that, then in that case, the stresses will have exponent r to the power minus half, where it tends to 0, it tends to infinity for r tending to 0. So it will have singularity, square root singularity, r to the power minus half. And in that case, that we can write the, again, the conditions that eigen mode shape equations will give you, in this case, A is equal to 2b. So here actually it is given there, see A equal to 2b, and just 1 second. A equal to 2b, and finally fz and chi dash z is given in this form. And finally, when you substitute these values in the expression for A, sigma y and tau xi, it comes out this way. And finally, to obtain this constant A, we make use of the Irwin's relation, limit r tending to 0, sigma y theta equal to 0 into root 2 pi r, and that is equal to stress intensity vector, and therefore this A constant is given in terms of stress intensity vector k1 by root 2 pi. Finally, your stress sigma y is nothing but k1 by root 2 pi r cos theta by 2, 5 by 4 cos theta by 2 minus 1 by 4 cos 5 theta by 2, and tau xy is k1 by root 2 pi r sin theta by 2 cos theta by 2 cos 3 theta by 2. But finally, that we get the solutions that we have got by the Westergaard stress function, and the displacements are also available after substitution of the value of the two functions fz and chi dash z, and we get the displacement field. So this is how we get the actually mode 1 solutions like the mode 3 solutions. So this is what is actually eigenfunction approach to reactive stress and field. So finally, I would like to say that we have been able to get the reactive solution considering both Westergaard stress function approach and also eigenfunction expansion approach. Both gives the same solution of the first term, and in the expression in the approach by William functions expansion eigenfunction expansion approach, we get possibility of infinite series because lambda will have infinite number of values. And finally, if you wanted to have the general solutions, then in that case, that general solutions, it will have both mode 1 and mode 2 problems. And in fact, one can write mode 1 solutions as solutions involving two functions, f1z and chi1 dash z. Similarly, mode 2 also you can write solution in terms of f2z equal to minus ICM z to the power lambda plus 1, and chi dash 2z is minus IDM z to the power lambda plus 1. So where m can take value infinite number of terms, and corresponding to each of the m value, lambda value will be minus half, 0, half, 1, and so on, infinite number of terms. And you propose these solutions, that gives you the general solution. So in general, you see that for a mixed mode problem, your solution is going to have the form, it is a m minus ICM z to the power lambda plus 1, chi dash z is bm IDM z to the power lambda plus 1, and you adapt them to get the general solution, and then the stress intensity factor that is going to be obtainable is going to be k1 minus ik2 equal to limit z tends to 0 to 2 pi z f dash z. And if you do all that substitution, finally you get that stress intensity factor k1 minus ik2 for this eigenfunction expansion approach finally is given by z tends to 0 to root 2 pi z f dash z, and finally it means that k1 minus ik2 is nothing but root 2 pi a1, k2 is root 2 pi c. So that's what it is, and this gives you opportunity of getting the stress intensity factor by the stress function approach. So that's how it is. So therefore, we just have been able to talk about this approach also for the stress reactive solutions. So that's how it is. The reactive solutions are obtained. There are two approaches. One based on Westergaard stress function approach, and which is just actually a single function, a single term expansion of the stress function. And in the eigenfunction expansion approach, you can infinite number of series to write the stresses, but then to find out the stress intensity factor, you get down to the actually single stress function approach only. And then because one first term is only the term which is going to be significant, and we can calculate the stress intensity factor for the problem involving infinite number of terms. So this is what is eigenfunction approach. So that's how it is, and therefore I think that one can actually look into the solutions of mode 2 also along similar lines. I will not talk about it, and in fact actually in the book that I have indicated earlier, all these are details are there. So please, you can look at them and then get the solutions. So I would like to actually then say that let us not extend the discussion further on this thing, because it is not going to be much use without having little more clarity on the steps. So I would not like to talk anything more, but I would like to actually just come to talk about something which is important for you, and that's what let me get started. Just 1 minute. Let me get that slide also so that I can make things clear. Just 1 second. Yeah, I think let me get this few slides for you, and then I'll get started. Sachin,
Yes, sir.
so I would like to actually get started with that application of fracture mechanics.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah, just itself, I want to introduce and then get to solve maybe later. So let me just get started.
no problem.
This I like to then present. Now, how do I actually present it? So it is this slide is here. So I have already got on the screen. So how do I share it?
Is it a PPT?
Yeah, it's a PPT.
Where is it?
Session 2 में है.
Ah,
So I wanted to actually get this thing on the screen.
yeah, section 2 folder mein.
हाँ.
Yeah, so let's see what type of file it is. Is it a PPT file
Yeah,
or
PPT.
PDF?
It is PDF.
PDF, na? Session
Ah.
2 mein, I think it is in session 2 then.
Right, it is in session 2. So this is it. Page down. Here it is.
Ah,
Yeah, here it is.
yeah.
So I would like to share it here. So how do I go about? I've got already on the screen.
It is already on the screen. You can just make it bigger. That's it.
That would do?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, here.
Yeah, once more.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Fine.
And it's visible?
Yeah.
Oh, great. So therefore, I just, would like to get on this topic and then discuss further. Yeah, I think participants, I certainly appreciate and also understand that you have certainly found a little difficult to grapple with the presentation on corrective solution. So that part is a little bit dry and not much of, understanding is possible just with this speed of presentation. But I wanted to talk about something very important for all of you, that after all, you see that we have titled the course as Damage Tolerance, a New Approach to Design, right? New design strategy. So you are trying to talk about new damage tolerance, new design strategy. But the question is that, all that I have presented so far, I have told you the concept of energy-based approach of Griffith. Then I have talked about SIF-based approach of Irwin. And then, we have said that what are the conditions of instability or failure that we have given. But now I think that, I don't know whether anybody so far has answered that, okay, this concept of design is that if you try to say Griffith's condition, it is nothing but G, strain energy release rate of Griffith reaching a critical value, GC, that is actually a condition of failure or onset of instability. And later on, Irwin actually converted that into saying that G reaching a critical value is tantamount to that SIF, corresponding SIF at the crack tip reaching a critical value, KC is the condition of instability or failure, or set of failure. So therefore, you see, the question is that how do we actually make use of all this in the design, that the design strategy, how does it become a design strategy? So you see that's where you must think of what is that ultimately. Ultimately, a designer, what has he to do? The sum and substance of all that we have discussed till today or even in the future, it will be based on the fact that fracture mechanics gives you the condition of failure as K reaching a critical value, corresponding critical value. And therefore, if you are thinking of designing for situations where there is crack inside the component, then what is to be done? Simply, it is very simple indeed. The designer, when he is interested in designing, then a component, simply he has to take the geometry of the component and he has to find out the loading on the component. And if the loading is in a particular mode, if it is mode 1, let's say, and majority of the cases are actually mode 1 loading, then in that case, for the corresponding component, you need to find out what is the SIF in terms of geometry of the component and the loading. That's what it is. So finally, you see the design is only to tackle, only to find out the SIF existing in the component under the condition of loading and its geometry. And once he is in a position to obtain the SIF in terms of the loading and geometry, then for ensuring safety or guaranteeing safety, what he has to do is that value of SIF that is existing, it must be less than equal to the material data KC, fracture toughness. That highest value that is material can tolerate is KC, and therefore this K that is existing in the component must be less than KC. And therefore you see that simple, it is very simple. A designer simply looks into the component geometry and its loading, and then he tries to find out what is the expression for K, and that K that is existing under the given loading and geometry, it must be less than equal to KC. So that's what is the designer's job. If you are to have safety in design, you make sure that your component with the given crack and loading, its SIF is less than equal to KC. That's what it is. So if the crack size is known, if the material property is known, you can immediately say whether the design is safe or unsafe. That's what it is. And therefore, you see, for application of this damage tolerance based or SIF based fracture mechanics based approach, two things are needed. For a component to be designed, one must know its geometry, one must know its loading, and at the same time, he must know what is the value of SIF. And this value of SIF, to determine, there are actually standard handbooks are there. You can consult those handbooks and collect the value of the SIF given for the given loading and geometry, and then calculate the K and see that it is less than the material's permissible K, and that's what for designing. So therefore, you see that the expression for SIF, they are available. Umpteen number of cases it has been solved and solutions are available in 4 handbooks, and actually in many journals the solutions for varieties of problems are there, and therefore I wanted to have you look at it. You see there are expressions. Look at this. There is a problem here. You see this a rectangular plate with a cutout with a crack in it, and then concentrated loading acting by 2 pins, and therefore for this case the SIF is given in terms of the geometry here. You see that K1 is equal to P by root 2 P by B into root W F alpha. So what is that? B is nothing but thickness of the plate, and P is the loading on the pin, and W is the width of the plate, and A is the crack size, and alpha is a function of P by W. And this function, they are available in the form of series, and this F function, F alpha function is given there, and it is actually some reference from reference has been collected. Similarly, if you think of a problem of beam, see beam with a crack, you look at this. This is a beam with a crack, vertical crack, and it is simply supported and loading at the center of the beam. And in this case, K1 is nothing but P, S is the span of the beam, and then divided by B, W raised to the power 1.5, where W is the depth of the beam, and F alpha is a function of alpha. Alpha is what? A by W. So it is crack size by W. Similarly, you can have problems of this type. Look at this. This is a rectangular plate wherein there is a center crack loading. It is a finite plate. It's not infinite plate. Finite plate of width 2W, crack size 2A at the center. Sigma is the loading. And this solution for the SIF is given there, and therefore you see that F alpha, the solution is of this form, and therefore F alpha, if you have this sort of problem, F alpha is given by this expression for the parameter alpha varying from 0 to 0.7, and then 0 to 0.6 it is again a different expression, and 0 to 0.7 different expression. Sources are different. So therefore you see that this is the way the solutions are presented. Look at this. This is a rectangular beam with a bending moment acting at its edges, and then again its SIF is given by the bending moment is M, and the dimensions are shown there, and then in that case the K1 is 6M by BW square root pi A F alpha, alpha equal to A by W. So therefore this F alpha is again given in a form of infinite series, and then source of this expression is given there. Similarly, if you have a crack of this type, let's say it is circumferential notch in a shaft and it is subjected to axial loading sigma, then in that case stress intensity factor at the crack tip is given by that expression, and again you can find out the value of this F alpha in terms of alpha, where the expression alpha is nothing but actually D minus 2A by D. So this is how the SIFs are given. Similarly, think of it is a circular plate like having a crack at the center line, and then loading is there by pin loading, and it is being opened up, and therefore you can get the solution for your this SIF at the crack tip is given. So therefore that the varieties of geometry is there, and one can get the solution for SIF. And look at this. This is a plate. This is actually specimen, which is a beam, which is arc-like beam with crack at the center line, and then it is loaded by two concentrated loading collinear and shown there, and therefore the SIF is given there. Similarly, if you have a plate with this sort of loading, then in that case you see the SIF expression is given there. So therefore, the designer's job is that if he has a problem of the component geometry, then in that case he ought to find out the expression for SIF in terms of the geometry and the loading, and then calculate the value of the SIF existing and make sure for the material that he has actually considered for the component, the SIF critical value, the fracture toughness they call it, that fracture toughness is greater than the existing SIF. So that's how the designer's job, fracture mechanics based design is indeed actually not difficult. It is simple that way, that one has to really consider the component and its geometry and loading, calculate the SIF, and then that makes sure that SIF is less than the permissible limit of the material, which is fracture toughness. So that's how it is, and therefore it's very simple. but I'm sorry. Unfortunately, that in many cases, the SIF expression that is, or rather the problem that is there, its solution is not readily available. SIF is not readily available. So therefore, the question is, how do you get this SIF? You have to, for non-standard cases, SIF has got to be obtained. So therefore, you must look for ways of finding out SIF. And in fact, that ways of determination of SIF in the problem, in the most cases, you are not in a position to get from the handbook solutions. You have to find. So you have to have different methods for doing it. And that is also some topic which is going to be given to you by our colleagues. So that is one issue. Second thing is that applications. How do you actually apply this? So therefore, that's what I wanted to discuss with you. And then probably that we will now not really try to open that issue today, but simply I just wanted to give you the gist of the thing, that fracture mechanics application indeed finally boils down to determination of SIF for the problem under the given geometry and loading, and making sure that the existing SIF is less than the fracture toughness, which is the critical value of the SIF that the material can tolerate. So therefore, the experimental methods are there to obtain the value of critical value, and so therefore there are testing methods to find out the critical value of the fracture stress intensity factor, and there are handbooks available for the determination of SIF for the given geometry and loading, but in many cases you won't have the value ready-made available from the handbook. Then in that case you might have to determine it, and therefore the varieties of methods for determination of SIF is also needed to be studied, and that will be given to you. But I think in most cases nowadays people try to get this SIF by using numerical methods like finite element method, and obviously they are going to have lectures for you also, determination of SIF by finite element method. Number of people will talk on that and give you the details. So that's how it is. And what I'll do, that I have also decided that whatever topic they have given for consideration with my considerations, they will be done. But at the same time, I would like to take up some applications also. I will take specific problems, and then how do we get the solutions for those problems using the fracture mechanics approach. So those are some of the things that I will discuss uh, and then during my lecture I'll discuss, and therefore I just wanted to open up that. Okay, so maybe actually, just to open up, I'll give you one case for today and then close. See that here is a problem. Determine the load capacity for a finite strip specimen with the following data. So the finite strip is a rectangular panel and whose width is 60 millimeter, thickness of the plate is 70 millimeter, and crack size is 10 millimeter. Now, fracture toughness is given to you, it is 45 MPa root meter. So, unit of the stress intensity vector is stress multiplied by square root length dimension. That's why it is 45 MPa megapascal square root meter. So, that is the type of unit it has. And material that is there for this component is with yield stress 300 MPa, and then B thickness is 70 millimeter, B is 205 GPa. So now the question is that find the center crack. So determine the load capacity when it is a center crack or when it is an edge crack, when it is double edge crack configuration. So how do we solve it? So this is the problem. So it's a rectangular plate with crack at the center, width is 60 millimeter, B's thickness is 75 millimeter, and fracture, the critical constant for the material K1C, it is known plane stress fracture toughness. K1 is mode 1 fracture toughness, C is actually indicating fracture toughness, resistance 45 MPa. So if you have to solve this problem, then how do we go about it? So that's what is there. So solution. Here you see alpha, the constant is actually the expression for the stresses is stress intensity factor is sigma root pi a crack size and multiplied by this F alpha. Alpha is actually ratio crack size divided by width, and therefore 10 millimeter is the crack size and center crack, and it is W is the width, so alpha is this, and therefore F alpha, after substituting alpha, it gives 1.02036, and sigma stress is the stress intensity factor is going to be sigma root pi a F alpha. So I have substituted the value, and if the material fracture toughness is 60 MPa root meter, you see, then in that case, it shows that crack size is given. Therefore, what is the load capacity? If your this thing is 60 MPa, then in that case, load capacity is 331 MPa. That stress can be actually 331 MPa. Suppose the fracture toughness is less. If it is 60, let's say 50 MPa root meter, then your load capacity reduces. If the fracture toughness is 45 MPa root meter, then the load capacity further reduces. So this is what it is. That for applying the SI-based concept, this is how you have to do. And suppose the crack is a second that was actually what was the problem there? The problem is that crack is center crack, edge crack. So if it is edge crack, so if it is actually a crack at the edge, one edge, so only just one edge, then in that case, you see, for that geometry, what is that we have? So B option there, you see that it is, this is the expression for the stress intensity factor for edge crack. And if I just put the value of again alpha, in this case, of course, we have solution for problem 2. And just 1 second, I think I'm talking of the other problem. Sorry about that. Oh, it is different problem. I'm sorry. So I don't have the solution at the moment present here. I will just giving you one case, center crack. So therefore, center crack, and that second one is solution for problem number 2. So that's different. Yeah, so that's different. So I'll not actually go further. So this is the type of applications, we'll have. I think I'll have actually more examples for considerations in future. So we'll do that. So I'll actually not take up further cases today. So maybe actually we'll just try to close it today. So Kim, is that okay? We'll close it today.
Yeah, yes, sir. Okay.
Yeah, so therefore, I think again it is a pleasure to actually talk to you and then give some more things about fracture mechanics. And my job tomorrow would be to really give again some new things on the aspect of fracture mechanics, and then we'll take up some problem solving tomorrow.
Yes, sir. Okay.
So
Okay.
with that, I'll close it today. Thanks
Yeah.
very much. And in fact, I am very sorry that today mishap has gone into, and then we have lots of difficulties today for doing the presentation involving the connectivity problems. And it was a very great nuisance. I'm very sorry that this has happened today.
No, that's okay, sir. Can we, I mean, take some questions if any participant has any? Now.
Any queries, please do.
Yeah, participants, if you have any queries related to any conceptual understanding related to current session or earlier sessions, you can, ask your questions to Professor Maiti now. We have some time.
Yeah, we have some time. I'll be too pleased to do that.
Thank you, sir.
None?
You can even ask questions related to your research that you are currently doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I had some points. I know we are teachers and we are always habituated to give you actually only suggestions and, some sort of, sermons. What I wanted to tell you that, you see, I since all of you are teachers, and I must tell you that, you see, that to learn a subject, you must approach the subject by having some fixed problems or number of problems in your mind. Getting to know a subject until and unless you have some problems in your mind, specifically, the problems you are doing research or you are actually doing, or you are actually trying to think about and for its solutions, if you really approach the subject with some specific questions in your mind, I can tell you the benefit will be actually multitude of benefits. And in fact, I always talk about my own case. I was not actually having any knowledge of what fracture mechanics is a subject or it is. But then, I started approaching it with a specific problem in mind and gradually started understanding, and then that's how I have been able to really come to this stage. And those specific problems are extremely important, and that helped me to study the subject from zero to whatever level I have been able to achieve. So please, all of you, if you are interested in learning a new subject, please have some questions in your mind. The more the questions, the better you are, because your then capability or your actually tendency to expand will be very high, and it is extremely beneficial. So you must have questions. We have come to these lectures. Either you try to keep a research problems that you are handling in your mind, or you are trying to design something, have those in your mind. Then in that case, you will see that your benefit is extremely high. So please have questions. Even while lecturing, that you just try to think of your problem in head, and then, you try to link it, and then you'll see that things are becoming much more clear. And your retention will be extremely high. So please do that.
So, sir, it seems that none of them has any question for you today, at least. So maybe we can close the session now.
Okay. So once again, I thank you all for the patient hearing and the trouble that has gone into today.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, sir.